There's a quiet paradox when it comes to people who pull away. The more you chase them, the more they retreat. The more you try to prove your worth, the less they feel it. And that's not because you aren't enough. It's because what they are wired to respond to is something far more subtle, far more powerful. They are drawn to a kind of energy that doesn't demand, doesn't cling, doesn't beg to be chosen. They are drawn to someone who has already chosen themselves. Think about that for a moment. Not someone who is cold, not someone who is distant, but someone who is whole. There is a profound difference. When you are emotionally self-sufficient, you stop looking at another person as your source of stability, and you become your own. And in doing so, you create a space where they can come closer without feeling consumed. Because what often scares an avoidant partner isn't love, it's the fear of losing themselves inside it. So when they meet someone who has a life, a mission, a sense of direction, someone who says, "I want you, but I don't need you to survive," disarms them. It intrigues them. It makes them lean in. There's also something deeply attractive about calm consistency. Not emotional roller coasters. Not intensity that burns too fast. But a steady presence that says, "I'm here. I'm grounded. I'm not trying to rush you, but I'm not abandoning myself either." That kind of energy builds trust in a way that pressure never can. And then there are boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are clarity. They communicate without words. I value myself enough to protect my peace. And ironically, the moment you stop overextending yourself to keep someone is often the moment they begin to value your presence more. Because now, being with you feels like a choice, not an obligation. And let's not forget playfulness. There's a lightness that dissolves fear. When you can laugh, tease, and enjoy the moment without attaching heavy expectations to it, you create an environment where connection can breathe. You become someone who feels like freedom, not pressure. But perhaps the most transformative shift of all is patience. Not passive waiting, but grounded patience. The kind that says, "I am open to this, but I am not rushing my life for it." Because here's the truth. When you align with your own purpose, your own growth, your own sense of meaning, you stop trying to force love into existence. And instead, you allow it to meet you where you stand. That's where real attraction begins. Not improving your worth, but in embodying it. So if you find yourself drawn to someone who pulls away, don't lose yourself trying to close the distance. Become someone who feels safe to approach. Become someone who is anchored, alive, and unapologetically whole. Because the right kind of connection doesn't come from chasing. It comes from becoming. Emotional self-sufficiency has a quiet power to it that most people underestimate. It's not loud. It doesn't demand attention. And it certainly doesn't try to prove anything. But it creates a presence that feels steady, grounded, and deeply attractive, especially to someone who is used to feeling overwhelmed by emotional expectations. When you are emotionally self-sufficient, you're no longer looking to another person to regulate your sense of worth, safety, or identity. You're not constantly scanning their behavior for reassurance. You're not measuring your value based on how quickly they reply, how intensely they show up, or how often they validate you. Instead, you carry a sense of internal stability that says, "I am okay, regardless of what happens here." That energy changes everything. Because when someone encounters you in that state, they don't feel pressure. They don't feel like they are being silently tasked with keeping you emotionally afloat. And for someone who tends to pull away when things feel too intense, that absence of pressure is incredibly disarming. It allows them to breathe. Emotional self-sufficiency doesn't mean you don't care. It doesn't mean you suppress your feelings or act indifferent. It means you feel deeply, but you take responsibility for those feelings. You don't place them in someone else's hands and say, "Now it's your job to make this better." There's a calmness that comes from that level of ownership. You're able to enjoy connection without gripping onto it. You're able to express interest without overextending. You're able to experience uncertainty without spiraling into fear. And that creates a completely different dynamic. Instead of chasing clarity, you become someone who naturally invites it. Instead of asking, "Where is this going?" you begin to observe, "Is this aligned with what I want?" That shift alone moves you from a position of dependence into one of quiet authority over your own life. People feel that. They may not be able to articulate it, but they sense that you are not trying to extract something from them. You're not trying to fill a void through them. You're already full, and now you're simply sharing your world. That's what makes them lean in. Because there's no urgency to escape. There's no sense that they're being pulled into something they can't control. Instead, they feel like they are stepping into a space where they are free to choose, free to explore, free to connect at a pace that doesn't threaten their independence. And here's where it becomes even more powerful. Emotional self-sufficiency naturally leads to better boundaries. When you are rooted within yourself, you no longer tolerate behavior that diminishes your peace. Not out of anger, not out of fear, but out of clarity. You recognize when something feels off, and instead of overanalyzing or justifying it, you simply adjust your availability. That quiet withdrawal of energy speaks volumes. It communicates that your presence is not unconditional access, it is something earned through mutual respect and consistency. And again, this doesn't push the right people away. It draws them closer. Because now, being in your life feels intentional. It feels like something that has value. And value is not created through giving, it's created through self-respect. So when you cultivate emotional self-sufficiency, you're not just becoming more attractive to someone who struggles with closeness, you're transforming the entire way you show up in relationships. You move from needing connection to choosing it. And that choice carries a kind of confidence that no words can replicate. Calm consistency has a grounding effect that many people overlook, especially in a world that often equates passion with intensity and connection with constant contact. But for someone who feels easily overwhelmed by emotional pressure, it's not intensity that creates safety, it's predictability, steadiness, and the absence of chaos. When you show up in a calm and consistent way, you remove the emotional spikes that make someone feel like they're being pulled into something they can't control. There are no sudden surges of expectation, no dramatic highs followed by anxious lows. Instead, there is a steady rhythm to your presence, one that communicates reliability without suffocation. That kind of energy feels safe. It tells the other person, you don't have to brace yourself here. You don't have to anticipate emotional demands or unpredictable reactions. You can simply be, and that matters more than most people realize. Because when someone is used to withdrawing the moment things feel too intense, they are constantly scanning for signs that things are escalating too quickly. They're looking for pressure, even in subtle forms like excessive messaging, overanalysis, or emotional urgency that feels disproportionate to the stage of the connection. Calm consistency removes that fear. It shows interest, but not desperation. It shows care, but not overinvestment. It allows connection to grow without forcing it into a shape it's not ready to take. And there's a quiet confidence embedded in that. When you are consistent, you're not reacting impulsively to every shift in their behavior. You're not disappearing when they take space, nor are you overcompensating to pull them back in. You maintain your energy. You stay aligned with who you are. That steadiness becomes something they can trust. Not because you've said the right things, but because your behavior reflects emotional control and self-respect. You become someone whose presence is predictable in the best way, not boring, but reassuring. There's no need for them to second-guess your intentions or decode your moods. What they see is what they get, and that clarity lowers their defenses. It creates a space where they can engage without feeling like they're stepping into emotional turbulence. They don't feel like they have to match an intensity they're not ready for, or manage reactions they don't understand. Instead, they experience connection as something simple, something manageable, something that doesn't demand more than they can give in that moment. And paradoxically, that's what often encourages them to give more over time. Because now, the connection doesn't feel like a threat to their independence, it feels like something that can exist alongside it. Calm consistency also reflects emotional discipline. It shows that you are not ruled by fleeting emotions or insecurities. You don't swing between extremes based on how much attention you're receiving. You remain centered, regardless of external fluctuations. That kind of emotional control is deeply attractive. It signals maturity. It signals strength. It signals that you are not trying to rush the process, but you are also not willing to lose yourself within it. And this is where many people get it wrong. They think that in order to keep someone interested, they have to increase intensity. They have to do more, give more, express more. But what actually sustains attraction, especially with someone who pulls away, is the ability to stay grounded, to show up without force, to remain present without pressure. Because in that calm, steady energy, you offer something rare, experience of connection that feels safe enough to stay in, rather than something they feel the need to escape from. A strong sense of purpose has a magnetic quality that goes far beyond surface-level attraction. It's not about being busy for the sake of it. or trying to impress someone with ambition. It's about having a direction in your life that exists independently of any relationship or path that you are committed to, whether someone joins you on it or not. When you live with purpose, your energy shifts. You're no longer centered around, how do I make this person stay? Instead, your focus becomes, am I living in alignment with what truly matters to me? That subtle shift changes how you show up in every interaction. You stop orbiting around someone else's attention, and instead you invite them into a life that is already in motion. There's something incredibly attractive about that, because it communicates that your life is not waiting to begin when love arrives. It has already begun. It already has meaning, direction, and momentum. For someone who tends to pull away when they feel like they are becoming the center of another person's world, this is deeply reassuring. They don't feel the weight of being your purpose. They don't feel like your happiness depends on their presence. Instead, they see that you have your own world, a world that is full, evolving, and driven by something deeper than just connection. That creates intrigue. It creates curiosity. Because now, being with you feels like stepping into something expansive, not restrictive. A strong sense of purpose also naturally reduces neediness. When you are invested in your growth, your goals, your passions, you don't have the same emotional bandwidth to overanalyze every message, every delay, every shift in behavior. Your attention is not consumed by the relationship alone. And that's powerful, because neediness often comes from having too much emotional energy focused in one place. When your life lacks direction, it's easy to pour all of that energy into another person, hoping they will give you a sense of fulfillment. But when you already have that fulfillment, connection becomes something you enjoy, not something you rely on to feel complete. And people can feel the difference immediately. They sense that you are choosing them, not clinging to them. They sense that your interest comes from desire, not dependency. And that distinction changes the entire dynamic. Purpose also brings a certain grounded confidence, not arrogance, not superiority, but a quiet certainty about who you are and where you're going. You don't need constant validation because your life is already anchored in something meaningful. That confidence is incredibly stabilizing to be around, especially for someone who fears being overwhelmed by emotional expectations. Because now, they are not dealing with someone who is looking to them for direction or identity. They are engaging with someone who knows themselves, who is building something, who is moving forward regardless of what happens. That kind of independence is not threatening, it's attractive. It signals that you are capable of standing on your own, which paradoxically makes connection feel safer. There's also an element of respect that comes with purpose. When someone sees that you honor your time, your goals, and your growth, they begin to respect you on a deeper level. They recognize that being part of your life is not something casual, it's something that must align with the direction you're heading in. And that raises your value without you ever having to say a word. Because now, your attention is not something you give freely to anyone who shows interest. It's something that is shared with those who genuinely complement your path. This doesn't push people away, it filters. It ensures that the connection is not just based on attraction, but on alignment. And in that alignment, something far more meaningful can begin to take shape. Boundaries have a way of revealing your self-worth long before you ever speak about it. They are not something you announce or defend loudly, they are something you live through your actions, your decisions, and what you consistently allow or refuse in your life. And when those boundaries are clear, grounded, and calm, they communicate a level of emotional maturity that is deeply attractive. There's a common misconception that setting boundaries will push someone away, especially someone who already has a tendency to create distance. But the truth is, the absence of boundaries is far more likely to create disinterest than connection. When everything is available, when there are no limits, when someone can come and go without consequence, it removes the sense of value from the interaction. Boundaries reintroduce that value. They show that your time, your energy, and your emotional availability are not unlimited resources. They are intentional. They are given with awareness. And that alone changes how someone experiences you. When you have boundaries, you're not reacting impulsively to someone's inconsistency. You're not bending yourself to accommodate behavior that doesn't sit right with you. Instead, you respond with clarity. If something feels misaligned, you don't chase or over-explain, you adjust your availability. That quiet shift speaks louder than any confrontation. It says, I respect myself enough to not participate in something that diminishes me. And that kind of self-respect is magnetic, because it removes the dynamic where one person is overgiving and the other is taking space. It creates balance. It ensures that the connection is built on mutual effort, not one-sided tolerance. For someone who is sensitive to pressure, boundaries actually create a sense of safety. It might seem counterintuitive, but when they know that you have limits, it reduces the fear that things will become overwhelming or out of control. They're not stepping into a situation where emotions will escalate without structure. They're stepping into something defined, contained, and respectful. Boundaries also prevent resentment from building. When you continuously ignore your own needs to maintain a connection, it doesn't create closeness, it creates internal tension. Over time, that tension turns into frustration, disappointment, and emotional volatility. And that volatility is often what causes someone to pull away even further. But when you honor your boundaries, you stay aligned with yourself. You don't overextend, so you don't feel depleted. You don't suppress your discomfort, so it doesn't erupt later in ways that damage the connection. You remain steady, clear, and in control of your emotional state. That consistency reinforces trust. It shows that you are not someone who will suddenly shift from calm to reactive because your needs have been ignored for too long. You address things early, quietly, and with self-respect. And there's a subtle strength in that approach. You're not trying to control the other person's behavior. You're not issuing ultimatums or making demands. You're simply deciding what you will and will not accept and allowing your actions to reflect that decision. That level of ownership is powerful. It removes the need for persuasion or approval. You're not asking someone to treat you well, you're showing them that access to you requires it. And in doing so, you naturally elevate the standard of the connection. People begin to meet you at the level you hold yourself, not the level you tolerate. So boundaries are not barriers to intimacy, they are the foundation of it. They ensure that when someone is in your life, they are there in a way that is respectful, intentional, and aligned with who you are becoming. Playfulness has a way of dissolving tension that seriousness often amplifies. It introduces lightness into a space where things might otherwise feel heavy, uncertain, or pressured. And for someone who instinctively pulls back when emotions start to feel overwhelming, that lightness can be the very thing that keeps them engaged. But this kind of playfulness isn't about performing or trying to entertain. It's not about forcing humor or pretending not to care. It's a natural expression of comfort within yourself, a relaxed energy that says, I'm enjoying this moment for what it is, without needing it to become something more right now. That distinction matters, because when playfulness comes from a grounded place, it doesn't carry hidden expectations. It doesn't feel like a strategy to gain approval or deepen the connection prematurely. It simply feels like ease. And ease is incredibly attractive. When you interact with someone in a playful way through light teasing, shared humor, or a sense of curiosity, you remove the pressure of constant emotional depth. You allow the connection to breathe. You create moments that feel spontaneous rather than structured, enjoyable rather than evaluated. For someone who fears being pulled into something intense too quickly, this is disarming. It shows them that connection doesn't have to mean losing their sense of freedom. It doesn't have to come with immediate expectations or emotional weight. It can exist in a space that feels open, flexible, and even fun. And that's often what keeps them coming back. Because now, being with you feels like a release, not a responsibility. At the same time, true playfulness is rooted in self-assurance. It doesn't come from a place of trying to impress or win someone over. It comes from being comfortable enough in your own skin to not take every interaction so seriously. You're not overanalyzing every word. You're not trying to control the outcome. You're allowing things to unfold naturally, with a sense of openness rather than urgency. That lack of pressure is what makes your presence feel different. It creates an environment where the other person doesn't feel like they are constantly being assessed or expected to respond in a certain way. They're free to engage without the fear of disappointing you or escalating things before they're ready. And within that freedom, something important happens. They begin to associate you with positive emotional experiences, laughter, lightness, ease. These moments build a kind of connection that isn't forced. It develops organically, without the need for constant validation or reassurance. It becomes something they enjoy, rather than something they feel obligated to maintain. But playfulness without neediness is key, because if that lightness is paired with an underlying sense of dependency, if it's masking anxiety or a desire for approval, it loses its authenticity. It starts to feel like a performance, And that can create the very pressure you're trying to avoid. Genuine playfulness, on the other hand, comes with emotional independence. You're not using humor to secure their attention. You're not trying to keep them engaged out of fear they might leave. You're simply expressing a part of yourself that is relaxed, open, and present. And that authenticity is what makes it powerful. It signals that you are not trying to control the dynamic. You're participating in it, enjoying it, but not attaching your sense of worth to it. That balance between lightness and self-possession creates a unique kind of attraction. It allows the connection to feel alive without becoming overwhelming, meaningful without becoming heavy, and engaging without ever crossing into pressure. Patience, when it's grounded and intentional, carries a kind of quiet strength that few people truly understand. It's often mistaken for passivity, for waiting around, for tolerating uncertainty without direction. But real patience is something entirely different. It is an active choice to remain centered while allowing things to unfold at a pace that respects both people involved. When you embody this kind of patience, you're not rushing the connection forward to ease your own anxiety. You're not trying to extract clarity before it naturally exists. Instead, you're observing, engaging, and allowing the relationship to reveal itself over time. That creates a very different experience for someone who tends to pull away, because one of their deepest fears is being pushed into something before they're ready. They are sensitive to urgency, not just in obvious demands, but in subtle cues like emotional pressure, constant questioning, or the unspoken expectation that things should progress quickly. Grounded patience removes that pressure. It communicates, without words, I am not here to rush you, but I am also not abandoning myself in the process. And that balance is what makes it so powerful. You remain open, but not overly available. You stay engaged, but not consumed. You give space where it's needed, but you don't shrink yourself to accommodate distance. There's a calm confidence in that approach. You trust that if the connection has potential, it will grow in its own time. And if it doesn't, you trust yourself to walk away without forcing it into something it's not. That level of trust, both in the process and in yourself, changes how you show up. Instead of reacting to every delay or inconsistency with fear, you respond with perspective. You don't immediately assume the worst, nor do you ignore patterns that don't serve you. You simply allow enough time and space for clarity to emerge naturally. And that clarity is far more reliable than anything forced. For someone who fears being overwhelmed, this kind of patience feels safe. It allows them to move closer at their own pace, without feeling like they are being pulled or pressured. It gives them room to process their own emotions, to understand their own level of readiness, and to engage in a way that feels manageable. But what makes this patience truly attractive is that it's not rooted in waiting for them, it's rooted in staying aligned with yourself. Your life doesn't pause while you're getting to know someone. You continue to grow, to pursue your goals, to invest in your own fulfillment. The connection becomes a part of your life, not the center of it. And that distinction matters, because it prevents you from slipping into a dynamic where you are tolerating uncertainty indefinitely. Your patience has a foundation that exists alongside your standards, your boundaries, and your sense of direction. You are not waiting endlessly. You are allowing space while still moving forward. That combination creates a sense of ease. There's no urgency in your energy, but there is also no stagnation. You are present, but you are not stuck. And that presence is what draws someone in. Because now, being with you doesn't feel like stepping into a timeline. They have to meet. It feels like entering a space where they can explore connection without fear of failing expectations. Over time, that safety often encourages them to invest more deeply. Not because they were pushed to, but because they were given the space to choose it. And choice, when it comes freely, always carries more weight than anything that is rushed or forced. Authenticity has a way of cutting through all the noise. It doesn't try to impress, it doesn't perform, and it doesn't reshape itself to fit what it thinks someone else wants. It simply shows up as it is, clear, grounded, and real. And for someone who is highly sensitive to pressure or expectation, that kind of presence feels both rare and disarming. When you are authentic, you remove the guesswork from the connection. You're not sending mixed signals or trying to maintain an image. You're not carefully curating every word or action to secure approval. Instead, you allow your personality, your thoughts, and your values to be seen without unnecessary filters. That honesty creates a sense of ease, because now the other person doesn't feel like they have to navigate a performance. They're not trying to decode hidden meanings or match an energy that feels exaggerated or forced. They can simply engage with you as you are. And that simplicity is incredibly attractive, especially to someone who tends to withdraw when things start to feel complicated or emotionally loaded. Authenticity also removes a subtle but powerful form of pressure, the pressure to meet expectations that were never clearly expressed but are deeply felt. When you are trying to be what you think someone wants, you often project an idealized version of yourself, and while that might create initial attraction, it also creates tension, because now there's something to maintain, something to live up to, and that tension can make the connection feel heavier than it needs to be. But when you are authentic, there is nothing to maintain. There is no gap between who you are and how you present yourself. That alignment creates a sense of stability that is both grounding and inviting. It tells the other person, what you see is what you get. There's no hidden agenda here. That kind of clarity lowers defenses. It allows them to relax into the interaction rather than constantly assessing it. And over time, that relaxation builds trust, because consistency in who you are is one of the strongest indicators of emotional safety. Authenticity also means you are honest about your needs, your preferences, and your boundaries, but you express them without force. You don't hide what matters to you, but you also don't demand immediate alignment. You allow space for the other person to respond, to meet you where they can, or to show you that they cannot. That openness creates room for real compatibility to emerge. Not a forced connection, not a one-sided adjustment, but a genuine alignment between two people who are both showing up as themselves. For someone who values independence, this is incredibly important, because they don't feel like they are being pulled into a predefined role or expectation. They're not being asked to become something they're not. They are simply being invited to connect, as they are, with someone who is doing the same. That mutual freedom is what makes the connection sustainable. It doesn't rely on effort to maintain an image. It doesn't collapse under the weight of unspoken expectations. It evolves naturally, based on truth rather than projection. And perhaps most importantly, authenticity keeps you anchored in your own self-worth. When you are being real, you are not seeking validation for a version of yourself that isn't true. You are allowing someone to see you clearly, and if they choose to step closer, you know it's because they are drawn to who you genuinely are. That creates a deeper level of confidence. Not the kind that comes from being admired, but the kind that comes from being known. And that confidence has a quiet strength to it. It doesn't chase approval. It doesn't fear rejection. It simply stands, open and steady, allowing the right kind of connection to form without ever losing itself in the process. Thank you for taking the time to reflect, grow, and invest in yourself. It truly matters. Wishing you clarity, strength, and meaningful connections ahead. Goodbye and take care.